The silence of the cruising altitude was shattered by a sound that did not belong in the sky, a deep, visceral explosion that echoed through the very bones of the giant aircraft. One moment, the world's largest passenger jet was a marvel of peaceful engineering. The next, it was a wounded beast, shuddering and bleeding fuel into the thin air. High above the ocean, with over 400 souls on board, Qantas Flight 32 was coming apart. In the cockpit, a cacophony of sirens and flashing lights declared war on the pilot's senses. Systems were dying faster than the crew could understand them. This was no longer a flight, it was a desperate fight for survival against a cascade of failures no one had ever imagined, pushing the limits of technology and human courage to the very edge. Our story begins not in crisis, but in routine. The Airbus A380, a true double-decker giant, was more than halfway through a marathon journey from London to Sydney. After a smooth refueling stop in Singapore, the atmosphere was one of professional calm. In command was Captain Richard de Crespigny, a former fighter pilot with a calm demeanor and decades of experience. Beside him was First Officer Matt Hicks, whose role was to manage the vast array of computer systems that flew this state-of-the-art bird. Second Officer Mark Johnson handled communications, and two Czech captains, Harry Wubbin and Dave Evans, were along for a routine proficiency evaluation. They were all seasoned professionals, a well-knit team who trusted each other implicitly. As they taxied, a casual joke, "Don't crash," lightened the slight tension that comes with any Czech ride. The passengers, settling into the enormity of the jet, watched the takeoff from a tail camera feed, a novel spectacle. The four massive Rolls-Royce engines, each a masterpiece of power, thrust the enormous weight into the sky with effortless grace. At 10:01 a.m., just 4 minutes after liftoff, the climb was normal. The electronic central aircraft monitor, the ECAM, which watches over the plane's 250,000 sensors, was silent and clear. Then, the universe changed. The explosion was not a pop or a bang, but a colossal, thunderous boom that vibrated through the cabin. In the economy section, a passenger's immediate, silent thought was, "Oh my goodness, maybe this is it." On the flight deck, years of training compressed into a single instant. Captain de Crespigny's hands moved before his mind fully processed the sound. An engine had failed, catastrophically. He took manual control, pressing the button to lower the nose and keep the plane level. His voice was steady as he assigned the first critical task, ECAM actions. To Matt Hicks fell the job of deciphering the avalanche of warnings that now flooded their screens. This was the beginning of the deluge. The ECAM screen, usually so orderly, became a frantic scroll of red and amber messages. Hydraulics, fuel, electricity, pneumatics, systems that had nothing to do with each other were screaming in failure. It was confusing, overwhelming. You could not see how many messages were pending, you just knew more were coming, a relentless digital onslaught. Meanwhile, a glance out the window revealed a nightmare. A thick, gray stream of fuel was pouring from the left wing, a tangible sign of the violence that had occurred. The wings of an A380 are essentially massive fuel tanks, carrying tons of highly flammable liquid. The sight of that stream was a direct path to a fireball. The crew's immediate priority was to cut fuel to the shattered engine, number 2. But as they moved to do so, a new alarm blared, a fire warning. The engine was already ablaze. An in-flight fire is the emergency every pilot dreads most, it is unpredictable and often fatal. With a push of a button, they discharged fire suppressant into the burning engine bay. A tense silence followed, punctuated only by the continuing chorus of alarms. The fire warning light went out. They had caught that break, but it was a small one in a rapidly growing storm. The plane was now a complex puzzle of failures. They declared an emergency to air traffic control, using the pan call to clear the airspace and buy room to think. But thinking was becoming a luxury. The ECAM checklists were endless. In training, a pilot might practice 2, maybe 3 linked failures. Here, they would ultimately face 58 separate failures. Matt Hicks later described it as being like taking plates from a never-ending serving machine at a restaurant. You finish one, and another immediately appears. The scale was unimaginable. As they struggled to comprehend their plane's wounds, the world below began to react. In the Qantas Operations Center in Sydney, engineer Alan Milne saw the live data stream from Flight 32. The messages were so diverse, from so many unrelated systems, that he initially wondered if it was a computer error sending false signals. Simultaneously, on the Indonesian island of Batam, villagers found large, smoking pieces of twisted metal falling from the sky. News agencies, putting the pieces together, rushed to report a terrifying headline: a Qantas A380 had crashed. At the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, investigator Kevin Chapman saw these reports and felt a chill, believing he was about to launch the biggest investigation of his career. Back in the damaged cockpit, the immediate danger was control. The pilots needed to turn the gigantic, wounded plane back towards Singapore, but making a turn without knowing how it would respond was a terrifying risk. With careful, gentle pressure, Captain de Crespigny began a slow left bank. The plane responded, sluggishly, but it responded. This gave them a fragment of hope. Now they needed intelligence. They could not see the wings from their seats. Second Officer Mark Johnson became their eyes. Leaving the cockpit, he moved through the cabin. A helpful passenger directed him to a window with a perfect view. What Johnson saw took his breath away. The left inboard engine was simply gone, replaced by a mangled stump. A jagged, gaping hole, roughly 2 feet across, was punched clean through the wing's surface. The metal was twisted outward like a savage flower. This visual evidence was a key moment. It connected the dots. Shrapnel from the exploding engine had acted like a bomb, shredding its way through the wing. This single event had severed fuel lines, hydraulic lines, electrical cables, and control runs all at once. This was why their alerts were so chaotic. The wing was a highway of vital systems, and a bomb had gone off in the middle of it. Singapore's Changi Airport, with one of the longest runways in the world, was their only viable haven. But a new, massive problem emerged: weight. They had taken on fuel for the long haul to Sydney and had burned almost none of it. They were a staggering 40 tons heavier than the maximum allowed landing weight. A heavier plane needs more speed to land and vastly more distance to stop. They were too heavy to land safely. The standard solution, dump fuel, was impossible. The fuel dump system was among the casualties. They were trapped in the sky with a plane that was too fat to land. Check Captain Dave Evans, the expert evaluator, now became a vital calculator. He plugged their failures and weight into the aircraft's landing performance computer. The answer was blunt: runway too short. They could not make it. The mood sunk. But Evans, like all good pilots, knew computers were tools, not oracles. He recalibrated, using his experience to input more realistic, less conservative data. The computer churned again. This time, it gave them a thread of hope: they could stop with 139 meters of runway to spare. On a 4-kilometer runway, this was a razor-thin margin, but it was a margin. Then, another heart-stopper. The computer suggested an approach speed that seemed impossibly slow. Matt Hicks looked at the number: 146 knots. His instincts screamed. That speed was dangerously close to a stall, where the wing loses lift and the plane falls from the sky. It can't be right, he thought. They recalculated, found an error, and settled on a safe speed of 166 knots. This critical catch, a human brain overriding automated data, may have saved them from a stall on final approach. Now came another courageous decision. They knew they had control problems, but they didn't know the limits. How would the plane behave during the delicate landing flare? Captain de Crespigny, while still at a safe altitude, decided to find out. "I'd like to do a control check," he announced. He gently rolled the plane left and right, testing its responsiveness. The result was alarming. The controls were mushy and slow. They had lost 65% of their roll authority. This meant that lining up with the runway would be a monumental task, with almost no room for correction. They would get one attempt, a single, perfect shot. The challenges kept mounting. The automated system for lowering the landing gear was dead. They could only release the gear and hope gravity would pull it down and lock it into place. For 2 long minutes, they waited, listening for the reassuring thunk and the change in air noise that confirmed the wheels were down and locked. With the runway now in sight, the final, precise dance began. The Crespigny had to balance the giant on a knife's edge of speed, 1 knot too slow, and they would stall, 3 knots too fast, and they would overshoot the end of the concrete. All this while wrestling with sluggish controls to keep it centered. In the cabin, an announcement asked passengers to brace. The silence was absolute. On the ground, emergency services scrambled. The world's largest passenger jet was coming in crippled and heavy. In the cockpit, the 5 pilots were a single organism, all eyes flicking between screens, windows, and gauges. As the runway threshold flashed beneath them, a stall warning horn blared again, a jarring, frightening sound. They held their nerve, trusting their recalculated speeds. The main wheels touched down with a puff of smoke. But the crisis was not over. The plane was not slowing down enough. Critical braking systems were damaged. Reverse thrust on one side was gone. Half the spoilers on the wings, which helped slow the plane, were inoperative. Brakes. Brakes. Matt Hicks urged, monitoring their deceleration. My feet are flat to the floor, the Crespigny responded, stomping on the pedal with all his might. The massive runway was being consumed at an alarming rate. Finally, as the end of the pavement loomed, the deceleration caught hold. The behemoth shuddered to a stop. A quick glance at the remaining runway distance showed they had 150 meters to spare. The cockpit erupted in a mix of exhausted relief and fierce pride. Beautiful. Welcome to Singapore, guys, someone said. For the passengers, a wave of euphoria washed through the cabin. They had landed. It was over. But on the flight deck, the warnings were still flashing. It was not over. A new, equally grave danger presented itself. The red-hot brake discs from the forceful landing were simmering at extreme temperatures. Next to them, fuel was still leaking from the torn wing onto the tarmac. Smoke began to curl from the landing gear. The plane, now stationary, had become a potential firebomb. The captain faced another monumental decision, to evacuate or not. He knew the statistics. An emergency evacuation, even in perfect conditions, leads to injuries. Here, passengers would be sliding down onto a runway potentially slick with fuel and foam. He judged that, for now, they were safer inside the fortified cabin than outside in a chaotic, toxic environment. It was a calculated risk, and he ordered everyone to remain seated while fire crews attacked the danger with foam. Just as this threat began to be contained, a final, almost absurd problem arose. The crew began the shutdown procedure, but engine number 1, the outboard engine on the damaged wing, refused to stop. The shrapnel had severed the control wires for its shutdown system. The mighty Rolls-Royce engine, designed to withstand typhoons, simply kept running. Firefighters, unable to get close, called the Qantas Operations Center for advice. They were told to blast it with water. High-pressure water cannons hit the engine, but it gulped the water like a tropical storm and kept spinning. Finally, they switched to fire-suppressing foam, literally choking the engine by starving it of air. After an hour-long battle, the engine sputtered and died. 3 hours after the explosive failure, the doors were finally opened, and stairs were brought to the aircraft. The passengers, their legs wobbly with delayed shock, disembarked onto the solid earth, many unaware of just how close to disaster they had come. The investigation began at once. The future of Qantas's entire A380 fleet hung in the balance. Debris collected from Indonesia included a critical piece, the turbine disc from the heart of the failed engine. This disc, a colossal piece of forged nickel alloy, is one of the strongest parts of the entire airplane. At the Rolls-Royce laboratory, experts made a shocking discovery. The disc had stretched. It had been spinning so ferociously fast that centrifugal force had physically deformed its metal, causing it to grow wider before it ultimately shattered. This overspeed event was the bomb that sent shrapnel ripping through the wing. But what caused the overspeed? The engine was taken apart piece by piece. Inside, investigators found a scene of soot and fire damage. The evidence pointed to an internal oil fire. The source was a tiny, innocuous part called a stub pipe, a narrow oil supply line. This pipe had snapped. Oil had sprayed onto scorching hot surfaces and ignited a blowtorch-like flame inside the engine's core. This fire weakened a critical drive shaft, allowing the turbine at the front to spin the central disk faster and faster until it exploded. The final, damning clue was in the broken pipe itself. Under microscopic examination, one side of the pipe wall was found to be dangerously thin, the result of a manufacturing flaw. A component no thicker than a couple of sheets of paper, born from a minute error in a high-tech factory, had set off the chain of events that nearly doomed a plane carrying 469 people. The investigative body acted with unprecedented speed, issuing a safety bulletin within 29 days that forced the inspection of every similar engine in the world. 34 engines were found with the same non-conforming pipes and were removed from service. Rolls-Royce overhauled its quality control and even designed new software to cut fuel to an engine in the event of a similar internal fire. The story of Qantas Flight 32 endures as a masterclass in aviation safety. It is a tale of two triumphs. The first is the triumph of human skill. The 5 pilots on that flight deck did not just follow procedures, they mastered chaos. They worked as a single, cohesive brain, questioning faulty computer data, physically assessing damage, and making brave, calculated decisions under crushing pressure. They used every ounce of their training, experience, and cool-headedness to land a plane that was, by all technical measures, barely flyable. The second triumph is of the safety system itself. The investigation was swift and thorough, transforming a near tragedy into immediate, global action that made every similar aircraft safer. It proved that the chain of learning, from incident to investigation to industry-wide change, works. The A380 is a monument to automation, a flying computer. But on that day, when its most complex systems were failing, it was the ancient, irreplaceable human qualities of judgment, teamwork, and courage that brought it home. The passengers walked away because a group of professionals performed at the absolute peak of their abilities, turning a potential epic tragedy into one of aviation's finest and most instructive hours.